I'm waiting for Jacoby. Are you there? Oh my gosh. All right.
We did it.
That took literally 20 minutes. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. So, our dear friend Erica Phillips she calls me Nana when it comes to technology.
Good to know.
So, yeah. Sorry, folks. It's my first Instagram live. I had no idea how to get on. But we're here, so let's go ahead and start this.
Yeah.
So, hi, folks. I'm Booker, and I'm thrilled to be here with my friend Jacoby Ballard as we talk about his new book. Yay! A Queer Dharma! So, this is Yoga and Meditations for Liberation, and this book is gorgeous and beautiful, and it is incredibly timely. I know Jacoby has been writing this book for years and years and years, and I feel like this was the time for it to come. So there's no, we always think, oh, it took too long, but it took exactly the time that it needed. So I'm so happy that it's here.
Yeah.
So, honey, I want to spend some time talking about our friendship. I want to talk about Kalyana Mita, the importance of spiritual friends, of being witnessed. I want to talk about anger and rage. I want to talk about our deep Buddhist meditation practices and how that informs things. And I want to talk about liberation. So that's a chapter that I was reading, and I was really moved by how this book is so deeply rooted in friendships and collaborations and connections and co-conspirators and the whole thing. So, but before we get there, I love an origin story.
Mm.
And so,
Origin story for the book?
origin story for you.
For me.
So there's this really great documentary called Seven Up where they say, show me the child at 7, I'll show you who the person's going to be when they grow up.
Mm.
And so I'm so curious, who is the person who wrote this beautiful book about friendships and heartache and pain and suffering and the liberation? Who's that person who found practice? And who were you at 7 years old that kind of woke you up to the possibility of liberation and moving towards this in your life?
It's so interesting that you name the age 7 because just before I turned 7, at about a month before I turned 7, my dad died. And I think of that moment as a moment of spiritual awakening because I still had this like heart connection to him. He was the stay-at-home parent. He was the like cuddly, soft, gooey one. The one who I just like knew unconditionally loved me. Um, and when he died, there was like a few things going on for me. One, I was just like, oh shit, I gotta be with my mom now. She's like the disciplinarian. She's the one with boundaries. She's like, ooh, this is gonna be tough. But also feeling like so connected to my dad still.
Yeah.
And both of my parents raised me, they had both left their churches. And so they raised me largely without any kind of religion or spiritual foundation at all. And so I think of like that moment just before I turned 7 as the spiritual foundation of like, how can I feel so connected, so loved by something that's like not here
Mm.
anymore? Yeah. And I don't know like what in a Buddhist frame, how we would identify that. Maybe like the interdependence and the, how we're like reincarnated and like our energies and life force continually is like recycled and composted and comes back as another form.
Yeah.
I felt his presence in the mountains and in a lot of my friendships and even with my partner, at like sometimes mundane moments and sometimes like moments of great suffering, I feel his presence, and my
Mm.
beloveds do too. Um, and you know, at first that was just like interesting to me when I was like a teenager, like, oh really, Stacy, you feel this and I feel this, isn't that? But then as I went on, I came to see like, oh, that's actually like a mark of a deep relationship, that like they can feel this deep connection that I have with my dad.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And, I think there's something so beautiful about knowing that early on in life, how just energetically, right? Like that connection is that heart space, that we don't need to be in direct relationship with somebody or to even have them still be alive for us to feel that sense of deep knowing and protection and care and love. And, that really probably buoyed you
Mhm.
throughout times that were really tough.
Totally. My
Yeah.
mom's also told me that my dad was he was, you know, he was in his 60s when I was born,
Yeah.
and he lived a life that in some ways I'm like so glad he modeled, of just like, I'm going to live with everything that means gives me joy. I'm not going to like tamp down my joy. And so for
He's
him,
like
it was,
early Marie Kondo.
yeah, totally. And and for him, it was like eating liver and smoking cigarettes and drinking the alcohol he wanted to. And he just, that killed him. Like that, you know, meant that he couldn't live as long of a life. And I've gone through periods of like being enamored of that courage, of
Mhm.
like, joy is so worth it, that like, even if my life ends short, I'd rather live 67 years well lived than like 87 years and I'm like not really there
Yeah.
enjoying it.
Yeah.
And then also sometimes deep rage, like, dude, you had a kid, I was little, and you were like, can't you have some commitment to me to like stick it out a little bit longer than 7 years?
Mm. Mm. Yeah. And it sounds like a legacy that your dad left with you was to like live your life to the fullest,
Totally.
right? Like do the things that bring you the most joy and do them. And, when I met you, I was reflecting on when we first met, which I think is about 14 years ago. You were in your 20s. You were like a child. You were like little baby. And I remember being so like, wow, like you had just started third root. Like you were like already like a fully formed, I know who I am. I know what I do. I created this amazing thing. And
Mm.
I was in my early 30s being like, And so, I think that that is probably the legacy of your dad. It's like if something needs to be done, you do it. You get in there and you do it.
Totally.
Yeah. And I have a lot of gratitude to the friends that brought us together. You and I have had a lot of overlapping communities and friends throughout the years. And I think for a couple of years, people kept saying, you have to meet Jacoby, you have to meet Jacoby. And you're getting that same thing on the other side. And when we finally met, you had come to a lineage training and Third Root had just opened. And I remember you being like, oh my God, Lineage Project. And I was like, oh my God, Third Root, can I come volunteer? And like a week later, I was at Third Root as a volunteer.
Totally. Totally. You really jumped in. And I was so excited to be in that training. Like one of my goals at Third Root that we never actually realized was to have a class for formerly incarcerated people, and
Yeah.
to have it be a space for folks that learn yoga in prisons, because there are so many programs like Lineage that are teaching yoga in prisons. But then when they get out, what then? You know?
Yeah.
That's still like for me an unanswered question, but I was so glad to find the Lineage project and be like, okay, there's some pieces to put together. I don't know exactly how we're going to get there, but we can get there. I see that like with the space I have and the training that Booker has, like we could get there.
One of those things that we did everything else together, but we didn't do that particular project together.
Totally.
Yeah. Um, yeah. So again, I just, it's so rare that you get 45 minutes or half an hour now at this stage to love up a dear friend publicly, to tell them how much you love them and how proud you are of them, and to really celebrate them and to witness them.
Mm.
And so, That's what I want to spend this time doing. Um, you know, when I met you, even though you were like very like clear and focused and third grade was up and running and you had these amazing teachers, um, you were still quite young.
Mm,
You were still quite young. And I remember there's a still, you know, my personal favorite emotion, anger and rage, like that was still very much alive inside of you. And
totally.
so over these years, I've seen you really grow. So I'd love to hear about like the use, like the benefit of anger and rage.
Yeah.
What is it like to transform it? And you know, what is a life without anger and rage? So I'm really curious about how you've worked with those emotions,
Yeah.
become who you are.
I really appreciate that from coming from someone who knew me in my like when like anger and rage defined my being.
I was always like, all right, hang on. What if they didn't mean to say that? What if they actually meant? And you were like, maybe. So
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I think so. Part of it was like my training in social justice had taught me, you know, if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention.
yeah.
Um, Silence is the voice of complicity. Uh, and I was, and also, I don't know where I got the message that like I was gonna judge people into liberation, uh, or like social justice, you know. But like, I mean, yeah, people in my 20s like witnessed that. I was like, they're not doing this, they're not saying that, they're like, rah. Everyone was triggering, you know, which is
Yeah.
a really hard way to live and creates a lot of suffering, which is not to say that there's not a lot to be angry at. I think anger is incredibly valid and wise.
Hmm.
And if I come, thank God you're still my friend, Booker. If you met me in that moment, like if I come at you with that, then like it's likely that the message isn't going to be heard.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, I, there was a moment where it was like, well, let me like shame people into believing what I believe or let me, you know, and, you know, I realized very, you know, early on that once people like feel, um, shame or whenever they feel like it's their fault, they kind of shut down. Whenever
Totally.
they feel shame, they're just like they can't listen anymore.
Yeah.
They can't be present anymore. And I remember a phrase I learned from you years ago was predatory listening. I think I learned that from you.
Wow, I don't use that term anymore, but
I know, but it was like a long, you know, but that is, but I think at that time what it meant was we're always listening for someone to say the wrong thing.
yeah.
Yeah, we're listening up for someone to say the wrong thing so then we can jump in and like tell them they're wrong, to shame them, to put them down. And so what was that defining moment, or was there many defining moments when you're like, you know what, let me actually take this anger, this rage, and how do I bring people towards me? How do I kind of bring them around to my side? So what was that process like, that growing edge for you?
I think, you know, part of what I've witnessed in so many activists, really regardless of like what age, but it's more like I think of it as the developmental trajectory of an activist, that first we get pissed
Yeah.
and then look, and then that's the glasses that we're wearing and we look around seeing everything from that place. And then we start losing people because we're judging, you know, we're pushing people away, we're judging them, and no one's going to stick around if like every time we have coffee I'm like, you should be like this, you said that thing, you didn't do that thing. What about recycling, Booker? Like that's like a nitpicky relationship. And I remember actually one of my dear friends from college who gratefully is still my friend. Now she's like a queer parenting comrade. We both have kids that are the same age. Um, but I remember her saying something to me. I don't remember what it was, but basically, like, you're pushing me away. You're not going to, like, how you're going about this is not inspiring me into environmental justice work. It's actually, like, turning me the other way. So
Mm,
your tactics are ineffective.
yeah. Yeah.
And I've heard countless, seasoned organizers say the same thing, and seasoned, spiritual activists, someone like Thich Nhat Hanh that says, that we can't abide in anger, that's creating suffering for ourselves,
Yeah.
as well as pushing other people away. And then I think just becoming moved by people like bell hooks that are coming from a deep commitment to love,
Yeah.
and that's what it's about. It's not about like seeing everything that is not justice and is not love. It's like being so committed to like, this is what love is, though. Like there's that and there's that and there's, the Voting Rights Act and there's this and there's, the hypocrisy of MLK Day, and
Hmm.
this is what love really is.
Yeah.
And so practicing that and building relationships built on that, and like I think also being in the seat of a teacher for 20 years, like seeing how much can happen if I hold someone with love and grace and just like,
Yeah.
it's okay, honey. You're a white dude enacting patriarchy left and right, and like
Hmm.
if I hate you for it, we're not getting anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it completely shuts down your own heart, right? And when you've got that big lump of coal in your heart, you can't move from that. And one of my favorite quotes by Maya Angelou, is around anger, and she says, "If you're not angry, you're either a stone or you're too sick to be angry. So be angry, yes, but you must not be bitter, because
Mm-hmm.
bitterness eats upon the host and does nothing to its displeasure. So
Yeah.
be angry, but you march it, you vote it, you write it, you sing it, you talk it, you never stop talking about it."
Yeah.
And so it's that transformation. She's speaking about anger being the catalyst, but then we also have like these talents, right? These skill sets that we can move into.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's part of why we can't demonize anger or anyone who is angry, right? It's because like that's such an important moment. Like, yes, wake up. We need that.
Mm-hmm.
And can we channel it
Yeah.
into love and to be strategic and to be, welcoming people and putting other folks' nervous systems at ease so that our message can be heard, so that our movement can grow bigger, so that we can work together.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of our emotions, whether it's depression or rage or anger or happiness or sadness, like they're inherently not good nor bad, right?
Right.
They're just emotions. It's like we then bring on this additional meaning to what it means. So if I'm angry, that must mean, and I have to be like polite and kind, and I can't hurt anybody. And it's like, so we squash and we push down that anger and that rage, but that is when we're saying, I care about something.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's an injustice, I care, like my heart is breaking. That's when it's time for us to move towards action. It's that tightening of the heart, right? It's that fire, that heat that we feel in our body. Like that's a catalyst, that's information.
Yeah. Yeah. And so much of our, like, how we show up in activism is a discharge of that anger, right? Like yelling in the streets or
Mhm.
stomping our feet or, I mean, I've been in, activist spaces with South African folks who are like dancing it, and moving it. And that's just like letting it out
Mhm.
so that we can retain the wisdom of it.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I don't think I ever really thought about that as a discharge practice, but absolutely chanting. Like in so many liberation schools, like chanting, singing together is part of that practice, and it keeps our hearts together.
Right.
It keeps our heart together instead of our hearts splitting off into 1,000 different pieces. It keeps us collective to unite and bring our voices together.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so when um, so we release it, and
Mm-hmm.
then the heart can grow again, continue to grow.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. And so, and just on the other side, is love.
Mm-hmm.
Not even on the other side, like right next to it.
Yeah, or underneath it, like I say in the book,
Yes.
right? Like underneath anger is a broken heart and
Yeah.
exhaustion and fear.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so I remember when I was teaching with my friend Bart Van Mellick, he would always say, like, I'm not angry, but I have anger within me.
Mm,
Because so many of our young people were like, I was told I was angry, therefore that's just who I am. And Bart was like, no, like anger is arising,
yeah.
joy is arising, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we can transform, we can move.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I want to talk about sitting in the seat of a teacher because you mentioned, when we're talking about anger and rage and having to transform your heart, you brought in because when you're sitting in the seat of a teacher. So I want to speak more about that and how taking that really sacred seat. I think the seat of a teacher is one of the most sacred places one can be. And so, how has that inspired how you show up in the world and your practice, knowing that people are expecting you to walk your talk? So, what does that look like for you? What have you learned?
I mean, a few things. One is part of how I teach is um, reaffirming people's self-determination, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like when I'm teaching a yoga class, I always say, if what I'm offering doesn't serve your body, heart, mind today, then do something else. Like it's not about me, it's about you.
Yeah.
Um, and I think if we don't do that, then we run the risk of ego being a big part of the teacher's seat. And
Yes.
we've seen the damage that that can wreck, right?
Mm-hmm,
In
mm-hmm.
like so many different lineages.
Yeah.
Um, and yes, there are people looking to you for like with real heartfelt questions and really wanting some answers. Um, I've learned to like whatever the question is, whatever the heartbreak is, to just like hold them in love and mirror back their beauty and the wisdom um, and let whether it's anger or grief or disappointment or curiosity, letting it all be okay, um, and letting it all be part of the spiritual process too.
Yeah.
Not villainizing any of it. And I think you and I have both seen, in some of the spiritual spaces that we've been in, the like spiritual bypass that grief or anger can be confronted with.
Mm-hmm.
And then that just shuts down the
Yeah.
person who's feeling it. And then probably what's going to happen is they don't go back to the space again, or they suppress it, and then it comes out the side of their neck,
Mm-hmm.
like all over a loved one.
I love that expression. Yeah, and there's something so powerful about being able to meet it head on when people are in their pain, to stay with the love, to stay with the open heart, to stay with the compassion. And I think of compassion being like a two-part process, right? Because first there's like the empathy. It's like, oh, like I feel your pain, because we share this humanity. I can feel what you're feeling, but then that compassion is to move towards action.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I feel your discomfort and I'm going to move towards action to try and alleviate your suffering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that discomfort is such a growth space, and
Yeah,
it can be a tricky navigation as a teacher to like part of our job, I think, is to make sure that like someone is ushered into discomfort without being propelled into overwhelm. Because once someone's in overwhelm, they shut down.
exactly.
But
Yeah.
discomfort is so productive.
Yeah. And that's where all the good stuff happens, right?
Totally.
That's where all the good stuff happens. And so burnout and overwhelm is such a huge part of the work that you and I have done throughout the years as part of our lived experiences. Um, and so, what have you learned about being in the overwhelm? What have you learned about being in the burnout?
Mm.
And what is that pulling back looking like now that you are, becoming an elder in some spaces? Look, listen, I'm just saying, we're 2 decades in.
I mean, it is funny to have like all these baby queers now teaching queer and trans yoga, and I'm like, I'm the old school.
That's
Who's
amazing.
been there for 15 years.
I know. I was doing something recently with Yoga Service Council, and yeah, they had, as a co-founder of Yoga Service Council, they're calling me like an elder and someone who's a pioneer, and then I'm like, ah, geez, but but the work that you and I have both done, like it's we weren't the first ones to do it, but I think that it was just like this time
Yeah.
where like this collective of folks found each other and we're like, wait, I want to do that. Seb says that millennials are old now. I know. I know. Kate Johnson just turned 40. I'm like, well, damn. You know? And so, yeah. And so I lost my train of thought there. But anyways,
You
my
were talking about
question,
overwhelm.
yeah, so how do we understand and feel in the body? I think the body, again, gives us all the information that we need. And so with that first foundation of mindfulness of body, having a yoga practice, we're diving into the body. And I kind of want you to finish that sentence in order to.
To nourish ourselves. One of the teachings of Jai Devi, one of my early teachers, is that we must drink as we pour,
Yeah,
and if we're not, then we're going to burn out. Then our hearts and our bodies are literally going to break.
yeah.
Um, and I think that's part of why I began the work that I do. Is I was seeing, incredible organizers in New York City burn out and then go into healthcare fields, become a massage therapist, become a yoga teacher, become a nurse, become a nurse practitioner. And I was like, wait a minute. I think that's because that's what's missing in our movements,
Yeah,
right? Like that space to heal, that space to take care was lacking. And so they literally had to leave in order to find that.
yeah,
And in the last decade, it's been so important as healing justice has, the tide of that has risen, that if our movements, if our organizations are sources of sustenance and nourishment, as well as the places that we pour our rage and our vision, then we can be there for the long haul. Like
mhm,
that work is never ending.
yeah,
Um, but I think overwhelm and burnout are symptoms that we're not stopping along the way to nourish ourselves.
absolutely. So from your book, A Queer Dharma, I want to read something, and this is from the chapter Liberatory Models of Yoga and Buddhism, which I was like, ding, ding, ding. You said that social justice organizations had no time for healing or restoration, and healing businesses had little patience or courage for conversations about dynamics of privilege and oppression as integral to the potential of healing. So that's sort of what you're speaking of, is that it was sort of like two people who were somehow meeting, two kinds of people who were somehow meeting in the middle. One was extremely into the healing, the other was extremely into the liberation of all beings through their activism,
Mm-hmm.
and they couldn't seem to meet in the middle.
Yep.
Yeah. And I have such gratitude for hearing people that are finding that way now.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. We see our activist spaces transforming into, having like healing justice be a budget line or be
Yeah.
in the organization. And then we're seeing so many of our Dharma and yoga spaces um, take on social justice as part of what they're doing, and have sanghas for queer folks, have for BIPOC folks. And for me, that's like a step along the way. That's a step towards the whole sangha actually embodying anti-oppression, right?
Yeah. I think we'll talk about affinity groups in just a moment, but just I was thinking during Occupy Wall Street, I had joined the facilitation group before I created the meditation working group of Occupy with Kate Johnson and some other friends. And I remember going to a meeting once and someone saying like, "This is Booker. She's going to teach us how to breathe so we can like." So I was like, all right, so we're going to take a breath together. And someone yelled, "You can't make us breathe," and then threw a chair at me.
Wow.
Yeah. You know, so this was, 11 years ago.
Yep.
This is what those spaces were like. There was a violence. There
Mhm.
was a violence towards the the mere suggestion of pausing and feeling into our hearts and minds and bodies and seeing if we're, what we're doing. And I think about Tanha and Chanda, which are those energies underneath effort. So
Mhm.
Tanha being that really like, fiery, like destructive energy, and Chanda being the more like slow and sustainable and let's, cultivate relationship. Um, and so we have to be in that slowness.
Yeah, I see so much trauma in that person that threw the
Yeah.
chair at you, Like
Oh
they're
my,
like, "Yo, Booker, it's never been safe for me to breathe. It's never been safe for me to feel. So how dare you?"
yeah, yeah, yeah. It was, yeah. And it's sad, it actually is heartbreaking when I see that kind of like violence and rage around self-preservation. I'm like, wow, that's really painful.
Yeah.
um I want to talk about just affinity spaces a little bit because you mentioned them, and I also want to let people know that Jacoby also helped me to come out, because when I met Jacoby I was straight. And Jacoby was like, "Hey, do you want to like sub like queer and trans yoga?" And I was like, "Yeah, but I'm straight." So, and Jacoby was like, "Why don't you just sub this class and see how it feels?" And I'm like, "Okay." And so, and so I want to speak to you about the importance about affinity spaces. And I think that when we both kind of were growing up, those weren't space, especially in the Dharma world, in the Buddhist meditation world. I remember the first affinity space, and it came out of like a really horrible, painful experience where a lot of people, after sitting retreat for 3 months, were like immediately in the first moments of speech were hit by like a racist comment. And so that was like the first time at IMS that there was an affinity space. And then after that, they've become a regular thing. They become a part that is part of the culture
Yeah.
of retreats. And so would love to hear your perspective on affinity spaces and why they're so important to you, and why you've really devoted such a huge part of your life to creating spaces for all beings to feel a sense of home.
Mm. Yeah. I think that they're necessary because it's a recognition of the racism that exists in a space, the homophobia, the transphobia, the ableism, um, and it's providing a refuge to those who are targeted by those systems of oppression. I also think for me, it's like I want to live into the day when queer and trans yoga is no longer needed because all spaces are like
Yeah.
so loving and embracing of queer and trans folks that it's just obsolete.
Mm,
And I also love to live into that space where like all racially integrated spaces like actually valued and cherished all bodies there, and where there was like some awareness of like what are we going to say when we first speak, because this is a really important moment, this is a really tender moment, and so can I make sure this is coming from a depth of my practice and a depth of recognition of who else is here, who is
yeah.
witnessing what I see, who where is it landing in their body heart soul. um, but so it's not a like a stopping place, it's just like for me like a stepping stone of like this is what we need right now.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. And I think for affinity spaces and other things, so we remember that it's not a place to stay forever. But I was so grateful that Gina Sharp created a BIPOC Sangha at New York Inside, because that's where I landed. Like when I came to the Dharma, I landed, on her lap, you know, and I don't know if I would have stayed in the Dharma if I didn't have that place to land. And it was a place where I lived for a long time.
Totally.
And I lived there long enough for me to kind of like get my legs, get my sea legs, or I think of like a giraffe when they're first born, they're like this long skin, it's kind of wobbly, you know?
Yeah,
And just having that sense of love. I see that Seven A's on this call. Seb was definitely one of those first Dharma sisters. But having that sense of like love and holding and deep witnessing allowed me to then move out into the world, all of us,
totally.
and to do our work in such a bigger way. Um, and I want to speak to another thing. So I mentioned earlier how you and I had collaborated on a lot of projects throughout the years. Um, and you wrote, I had begun to see critiques as noticing gaps that need to be filled, sometimes with passion and anger, other times with creativity and curiosity, and often both. Then you go on to say it is courageous work to create organizations, projects, and trainings that aspire to create a new model that makes the old model seem obsolete, while inviting feedback and committing to continued evolution. All projects will have gaps. We learn from the mistakes and what is missing, and we take the lesson to create something more complete based on the moment that we are in, which will also be incomplete. So again, this is from A Queer Dharma, the chapter on liberation.
Mm.
And I love this because you're speaking about that the gaps that are in organizations need to be filled. And so we see these gaps and we get angry. Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing land acknowledgement? Why aren't you doing gender pronouns? Why aren't you asking people's access needs are, right? Blah, 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 blah. So we get angry and we demand these things. And then we're like, you know what? I could actually just create that myself. Like if it's not
Yeah,
there and the organization's not there yet, I can just do it myself.
totally.
And I love that you spoke of um, the courageousness it takes to create these trainings and organizations to do this work in. Um, and the root word of of courage is heart. And so courage isn't something that we wish into or think into. It's completely and totally a heart-centered practice. And so I so appreciate you naming that yeah, it is anger and rage and curiosity, creativity, bringing your folks together, collaborating, co-conspiring, right?
Yeah.
So,
And it's so much easier to critique. It's so much easier to be like, that's not here, that's not here, that's not here. And then when you try to create the thing, you find, oh shit, there's like lots of systems of oppression working against me. And it's like, I think about our yoga classes at Third Root. Um, at the end, they were kind of like where we imagined them being at the beginning. But we realized like, even if we have a majority queer teachers, majority BIPOC teachers, we still are working with the legacy that yoga has on Turtle Island, which
mhm.
is very white. So even if we're doing lots of things that will welcome in BIPOC folks, disabled folks, fat folks, queer folks, trans folks, there's that everything that preceded us is going to usher white, straight, middle upper class folks, thin folks into the room. And it's not about us. It's not about what we're not doing necessarily. It's about what preceded us. And so there's the the systems of power that we're working against in order to create something that is embodying justice are so strong and so deeply ingrained in each of our body, heart, minds that we without one another, without careful guidance and Kalyana Mitra, right, we run the risk of repeating some of that stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and and also our offering is always going to be incomplete. I feel like Third Root got more critique than most sanghas, than
Yeah.
most acupuncture studios, just because we were available for their critique. So all the critique that would have been um, waged against Ishta or Om or Jiva Mukti or all
Hmm.
the other really mainstream huge studios, there was no outlet for it There
Yeah.
was like a spiritual bypass. There's a total block in those spaces.
Yeah.
And so once they met third root and they're like, oh, you're finally able to listen. And I see this little inkling of what's wrong
Yeah.
here that's wrong over there. Let's talk about it. And so it's like this like dump truck load of like all this emotion
Yeah.
from decades, that's like repeated again and again, that for me it's a lot of grief of like, oh man, we're trying to do it right and we're doing it so wrong. But I more came to see like they feel safe enough to offer this feedback, to have the courage and to know that we're going to hold it, we're going to listen to it, even if it's spoken unskillfully, if it's like, you know, a Yelp review that's like written in rage, we're
Yeah.
still going to listen.
Yeah.
Um, that's a gift not only to third root, right, but to like everything that's going to grow beyond third root, everything that's going to transcend third root.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I just want to name a couple of things that you've been involved in. So things that you've invited me along to as well. So there's Third Root, Bending Towards Justice. Um, I pulled you into Off the Mat, and then I pulled out, and then you pulled me back into Off the Mat. And so that's sort of like a, yoga service council, yoga and action trainings that we taught together for a long time. I actually, I'm packing up, I'm moving, and I found one of our initial postcards that we took. Remember Snice, that really cute coffee shop?
That's
Yeah.
that, that was such a cute photo we took.
I know. I know. So cute. And so that's just like a few things that you created, and and one thing I love about you, Jacoby, is that you've never been like, it's the Jacoby show. It's always like, I have an idea. Let me pull in my homies and let's see what we can do together. Let's pull our resources. Let's pull our wisdom. Let's pull our lived experiences, and then let's create a curriculum and like kind of reflect, like
Right.
what's working, what isn't working because of this, or here are some things that we should, oh, I never even thought about that because that's not my body, or that's. And so I love that you've always brought together a motley crew of folks who are so deeply rooted in our hearts and our love, and deeply rooted in wanting to get it as right as possible.
Mm.
And so I just have such deep appreciation for you and just this continued collaboration. And we started a little late, so I'm wondering if we need to hop off now, or do we have a few more minutes?
I have a few more minutes, and also I would love for you to give away a copy of A Queer Dharma to someone that's here.
Yee-hee-hee. I'm like, how do I find people? Okay, this is all like so brand new. I would like to, whoever Love Activist is, Love Activist, you get a copy of A Queer Dharma, Yoga and Meditation
Yay.
for Liberation. So congratulations, Love Activist.
So love activist, DM me. I might already have your address if you are who I think you are. But DM me your address and I'll have my publisher send you a copy of the book.
Yay. And this book is so beautiful because it's like, here are some thoughts. I've interviewed some amazing people. And I love in this chapter you interviewed dear friends Brenda Salgado and Andy Gonzalez and Nikki Myers. Really, really sweet to hear. First of all, also just to like name the years this organization started. Just so beautiful to know that these amazing pioneers have been around and are still around,
Yeah,
2 decades later. So
totally.
it was really, really sweet.
Totally.
Um, hey, Queer Sangha, up there in Montreal. I love you folks.
Hi,
Um,
friends.
um, yeah, and this, at the end of the day, this is all rooted in love.
Mm-hmm.
This is all rooted in love, and having an opening heart, and this continuity of learning. Like we're never ever stopping. We're constantly learning, and I know that something you mentioned the other day with Nicole is like, you took all the trainings, you know? And that's what we did. We would go to each other's friends. We go to our friends' trainings, see what they're offering. We'd go and be a guest teacher, you know, like there's like this way that we're constantly learning and growing. And so, how are you still growing and learning right
Mm-hmm.
now, today? Gigi
That's a
might be
good
part of that answer. I'm not really sure.
question. I mean, teaching, I certainly, whenever I hold space for folks, that's certainly a huge growing edge. There's always something that I learn from people that are present. Um, I'm teaching prenatal yoga now, a queer and trans-centered prenatal yoga,
Yeah.
and hopefully my current crew will go into postnatal yoga too, so that'll be a new offering as well. And I mean, yeah, that's a whole new field for me. And in some ways, you know, I feel so not adept at what I'm doing every time I teach, but I also like remind myself like this is how you become adept is by you
Yeah.
keep teaching, right? And receiving feedback like this worked, this didn't work, you know, this language is right on, this language needs some work. And then whenever I'm invited to speak at a conference, I try to attend a couple other um, sessions from folks that I've never been to before. I recently took a session with Reggie Hubbard, um, Zabi Yamasaki. I haven't gone to yet, so she's on my list. Although I have her book on my shelf now. Folks that are like, you know, in the same field. I feel like when you and I began the work, we knew everyone doing this work.
Everyone, we literally knew every single person.
And it's no
Yeah.
longer true, which is such a blessing. Like there's so many people doing this work now that I don't even know everyone doing this work.
Yeah. I know. I know. Yeah. And it was, you know, the other day somebody reached out to me and they said, "Hey, like, you know, we're working with, you know, with underserved populations, with marginalized kids. We don't have enough teachers. Can you connect me with people so we?" And I was like, "You don't have enough teachers? Oh my gosh, there's an abundance." And so
Right.
it was so lovely to reach out to other organizations, people that I love and trust, and say, "Hey, these people, you know, like people are able to do this. It's like their full-time job,
Mm.
you know?" Um, it's really extraordinary. And it feels like it happened so quickly, and yet it has not happened so quickly. But
Right.
yeah, but it's extraordinary. And I'm so grateful for the younger folks who have the energy, right? I'm a little bit lazy now, but those folks, I used to like, I mean, I still hustle. I used to like hustle, like sleep like
You
4 hours a
did.
night, you
You'd
know?
be like on Rikers Island by day and then like back in Manhattan by night and then like in Brooklyn the next morning teaching.
I lived in Harlem. I would be at Third Route by 9 a.m. to teach and then go to Rikers. Yeah, it was a thing. Too tired now, too tired. But
Totally.
yeah, but so inspired by the young people, the new people that are in there energetically.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think that the intergenerational piece is also something that I know is really important to you, to have elders and
totally.
youngers, that the young folks around, being in these multi-generational spaces.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. We learn from each other. The young folks bring so much energy and the older folks bring so much wisdom.
Yeah.
And when both energy and wisdom are present, like that's something magical happens.
Yeah. I remember us watching a documentary on a Grace Lee Boggs, and she said that at the end of her life, her activism was listening.
No.
And I just thought that was so beautiful, to hold space and to witness. And going back to Kalyana Mitra, however, whether you're saying it in Pali or in Sanskrit, um, but that witnessing is everything,
Totally.
you know? And I know you and I've had many conversations over the years, like, am I, did they, did we, you know, just like, what? I think that happened, but I'm not sure if that happened, right? And so just having
Totally.
someone who can like bear witness with you, bear witness to you,
Yeah.
to yeah, to love you up and to tell you how amazing you are.
Mm.
I'm telling you how amazing you are.
Thank you, friend. It's such a joy to just know that like my book is in your beautiful hands and it has your eye prints all over it. It's so exciting.
Yes. I love it. And this is like a book of like it's like a history book, you know. It's really like I remember that organization. I remember that person. It's such a beautiful gift to this world. So thank you so much. Thank you, Leslie, who just was with you this whole time. And thank you for Gigi, who is also giving you some like love and kisses in the process of creating this book. And I just have such gratitude for everyone who proofread, who edited, who put eyes on this, who put their love into it. This is, you know, some books you read and you're like, oh, there were like 50 hands on this book. So this book is like, it feels like your life in book form. It's like collaboration and stories and history and our hope for the future.
Mm.
Um, it's also a great resource book. You're like, wait, who is that? There's so many names that like people
I
can
hope it will
go.
be that. Yeah.
Yeah. So just like, yeah, this is just, it's so beautiful. It's so beautifully done. And I'm so happy that it was Jacoby, who wrote this book, not the Jacoby of 15 years ago. It would have been a different book. It wouldn't have been a bad book. It would have been a
Right.
totally different book.
Yeah.
This book feels like it's for everyone.
Mm.
It's for
Thank
everyone.
you, friend.
Thank you. Thank you. So, I don't know. You want to wrap it up?
Oh, Um,
Do I
yeah,
mean,
well, so
I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, so folks can find the book wherever books are sold. I'm trying to encourage people to buy from independent booksellers instead of increasing Jeff Bezos' wealth. And if you have to do that, please leave a review on Amazon. And yeah, please feel free to follow me and follow, yeah, all the like many people that I mentioned in my book. I part of the hope of the book is not just that it's not just about me, right? It's about like uplift of like all those that are dear to me.
Thank you, Jacoby Ballard.
Thank you, Leslie Booker.
You're the best, and I'm just so incredibly grateful for our ongoing friendship, and may it continue until we're like proper elders,
Yes, absolutely. We're fully gray. Let's teach together then too.
fully gray. I know, fully wrinkled, just beautiful, just
Yes,
like all the things.
yes. Sounds good. All right, signing off. I love you.
I love you so much, honey. All right, bye, everyone.